All right. So for those of you who don't know who I am and are just sort of like seeing this and like, what, a mentorship meeting? Who does that on Twitch? I am Brooks. I run this channel. I do a lot of Rust programming here, but also I am a manager. I run a team at a company that Kyle, our my mentor, used to work at himself. I've also worked for Kyle at a third company that was not that one. That's where actually I learned a lot of my stuff and where I gained Kyle as a mentor. But then I also just am passionate about a lot of things productivity, a lot of things just, well, getting stuff done, getting it done right, and not burning people out because that's kind of important. Kyle, you have one of the most interesting backgrounds of a person that I've ever met. Like, I always like
Oh, thank you.
to throw out there because you don't always mention it that you know so many skills, like one of them including knife fighting. So
Yeah, that's true.
um, you're one of the best instructors, one of the best managers, one of the just best peoples to know, and you're
Jesus, this is my
super
birthday?
knowledgeable. So, anyways, uh, yeah, let's hear an introduction and like where are you right now and what's going on.
Sure. So, hi everybody. I'm Kyle. I'm an educator, a business dork, and a software engineer. So right now, what I'm doing is I run an organization called Sika Education, and it's like an independent education consulting kind of stuff right now. So, like for the last year, I did a curriculum write for a code school in Puerto Rico. I've done a bunch of React workshops through Pluralsight, and I have in a couple of weeks I'm going to start teaching a 16-week program for Ford Motor Company. They're going to take some of their staff members and turn them into that are like customer service, sales, like some of that kind of stuff, and then turn them into software engineers. So I'm going to be doing that program. And then before all this, I was the director of education for Flatiron School. I worked at Health Scholars, where Brooks is now. Before that, I was the faculty director at Galvanize. And before all of that, you can kind of see it behind me. I was an audio engineer and a musician and stuff. And yes, I practice eskrima, which is a Filipino knife fighting martial art. Did
That's
I leave anything out, Brooks? Anything else I should I should throw in there?
I think that's pretty good. Just cropping your video down to just you, or at least as much of you as I can get. No,
Cool.
I think that's really good, and that's sort of like the business side and like the working as management stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and I think like one thing to sort of like get out of the way early because this is something that like we're both passionate about is not overworking, not burning
Yeah.
ourselves or other people on our teams out. And I so like I want to hear it like once again what,
Yeah.
and this is more for like Twitch also.
Sure.
Why don't you like overwork?
So the problem with overwork is that it doesn't work. So like the purported purpose of overworking is like you get more done, which is a bad assumption. So like we don't need to get into any other. We don't need to go any further than that to justify it. That because like any other thing becomes at least something that you can have an argument about, where it's like, oh well, is it ethical? Does it feel good? Is it kind? And like those are totally like appropriate reasons to not want to do it either, but we don't even have to get that far. The idea that you can produce something of value by working past your breaking point is just not true. And especially in the kind of in like knowledge work and stuff, that breaking point is a lot earlier than it is in a lot of other things. And so a lot of like our ideas about what work and those things look like come from like industrial revolution era stuff. And it wasn't like they were studying effectiveness or productivity very well there either. And a lot of the early attempts to do that with like uh, Fred Taylor is probably like one of the biggest business villains in history. Like were they weren't exactly rigorous research. And so, especially in work that's like fundamentally driven by your creativity and your attention to detail and a lot of these kinds of things. The idea that you can work 13 hours a day and like and move something forward is just incorrect. And like another thing that's sort of related to that is this idea that starting things feels fast, but finishing things is fast. I'll probably come back to that a few times. But you go, oh, but look at all the things that we got started. But what inevitably happens as everybody's like cramming to get something done is not a lot of things get finished. And with all these things in flight, they start fighting with each other. And since everybody's tired, they start making mistakes. They start making dumb mistakes, and they lose the capacity to even see that they made mistakes. And so ultimately, you end up with something that looks like you made a lot of progress because a lot of things were started, but not a lot of things were finished. So it's hard to say that you actually made progress. And when the full accounting for like done happens, I think you have a tough time arguing that you ever saved time by overworking.
Yeah, and I think like the definition of done there is really important because
Yeah.
it's really easy for us developers, especially to like go into like our Jira boards. I'm assuming we're using Jira, like 90% of us are. And you look at your column in like to do, doing, and like usually what QA is next or code review is next. And we're like, okay, we moved it into to doing, and then we're done with it. It's done. We moved it into the next column. But I think like where this like idea comes from, and something that I've been like really passionate about recently, and I know you are too, Kyle, is changing that definition of done for that team, the organization, to it's not done until it's shipped and used.
Yeah. And so, and like you could even push that to like, and the customers dig it. Like it is actually solving the problem that like you wrote the software to solve for them. And like, and you could also put in there the like, and we didn't screw up our product in the process, which is I think where a lot of that like crunch time stuff starts coming, is like, oh, and you just stopped using the tests, like they were getting in the way, so you just turned them all off. Like, well, now you've made it more difficult to move forward in the future. So like once you've accounted for all of that, happy users that are able to accomplish the thing that they hired you to do for them, that your code base is like in as good or better shape than you started it in, it's tested, it's documented, it's all of these things. Like you just don't save time by not doing those things. You save like a little bit of time to not move that much farther forward. And really, like once that starts piling on top of itself, now you have something that people are afraid to change, they're afraid to work on, they're afraid to add things to, so they start duplicating stuff in the code base, and like it becomes scarier and scarier to work on until you go tech bankrupt.
Yeah. That well, and so that sort of like leads forward to, velocities and like tracking progress and trying to get things done
Sure.
fast, but not also like burn ourselves out, not do bad things, not have unplanned or work or bugs or whatever other terminology you want to call it. And something that I do with my teams is I keep track of I point everything. I point, the unplanned work, I point bugs, I point good stuff. I then also um I then also keep a tag on every point to mark it as a different type of point. And that way I can then track, okay, well, these are business points. These were like the business value added points. These were the value like that should have been there but weren't there later. And I can get a delta of that to give me this nice little graph to show, okay, are we generally adding more technical debt? Are we adding more bugs over time? And I think this is where like my domain driven design slash development like desire or like really like I'm really interested in that because I'm wondering, can I use that to close the gap? to like make it
Mhm.
and reduce the number of bugs, see that happening over time, because that could mean faster deployments in the end.
Sure. So I don't know. I don't know that it would work into a system quite like that. I think a a really modeling heavy approach like DDD could potentially do, like a lot of times it looks like um, not a lot of value added work because especially early on, you spend so much time doing refactoring and not as opposed to adding new features. But that it like I think you're if you point those things and you're trying to see a proportion of those, you'd probably see something like a 3-to-1 uh, rework to like new feature ratio, which like I don't even know that I would want to see it. It like might just get discouraging and make you like want to stop doing it.
Interesting.
Um, but what it does do, the value of it, even in light of that, is it enables a lot of like evolutionary architecture stuff that keeps you fast in the future. I'd even say it makes it easier to take on like more ambitious things in the future. And so that's why it's worth it. And I don't think it thrashes that much indefinitely. But like part of what it's supposed to enable is even if you wanted to do a crazy wild refactor in the future because the domain shifted or your understanding of the domain shifted, like the architecture would support that and work with you rather than against you. And like you'd minimize the number of things you'd have to break in the process of doing that. And so it's worth it for all of those reasons. But I don't know that like if you were trying to track like the amount of value creation that's happening, that you'd get a lot of meaningful things out of that.
I realized that I didn't also like start that the domain driven design with like
Yeah,
introduce domain driven design slash
sure.
development.
So I want to caveat this just a little bit. I am not like I do have like pretty deep expertise in Agile and Lean. I don't have that same level of expertise with DDD. It's fairly new to me, and so like um, this is more like my experience of DDD like over the last few months rather than an authoritative take on it. So like caveats over. All right. Domain-driven design is a technique pioneered by Eric Evans. I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. That is kind of combines like a lot of different um, agile, lean, and OOP ideas into one kind of mental model. So with domain-driven design, one of the reasons that it still gets talked about so many years later, because there's a lot of stuff in the original book that like just didn't age well. Not in that he was wrong, and that like we just as an industry don't have that problem anymore. But the reason that it's still worth talking about is I would start with a DDD concept called ubiquitous language. And ubiquitous language is using the same terms to mean the same thing throughout the entire system. So like, hang on, I live next to a fire station, so that happens a lot. But the idea that the terminology that your customers use, that your salespeople use, that your managers use, that the engineers use, and what's in the code base are all the same. And that your code is a like working model of your understanding of all these different parts of your domain and how they interact with each other. So like to go back even higher than that to like what a domain is. So like I work in education, right? Things that are in the domain of education, students, assignments, tests, lessons, materials, exercises, all those things are like in the domain of education. And in a particular product, it might be something like a student can only be enrolled in one course at a time, or they can be enrolled in like up to 7 courses. All those things are domain rules, but like forklifts are not a part of this domain, or like commuting times. Like there's all kinds of things that are not part of the education domain. And so when you're like building out the product, part of the challenge, and the book is all written from the perspective of like you're like kind of a mercenary software engineer. You're brought into a project to write software for them. And like I think he was writing this in an era when a lot of folks were like, I don't need to understand the domain. I just need you to write a spec for me and then I'll implement the spec. And this argues very strongly in the opposite direction, is like the SMEs, the subject matter experts, need to be your best friends, and you need to spend a lot of time like trying to like turn their understanding of how all these different pieces work into software. And if you have modeled the domain correctly, that's what enables like being able to do radical changes and add stuff without feeling like you've kludged things because you coded yourself into a corner by not appreciating how the domain works. And like that's not always easy to do, because even the subject matter experts, they take things for granted that like they've never had to explicitly describe before. And it's part of what we do as engineers, is like teasing out those little things about the relationships. And so the first half of that book is like all about, as you use the ubiquitous language out loud, like keep looking for this face every time you talk to a non-technical person when you use a word, because they're like, oh, so like one shipment has many containers. And if they go, does it? That probably like means that your understanding of the domain is at least incomplete. And so like that's the big modeling part of this. And then the second half of the book is Supple design, which is like an implementation of that, and like some specific software engineering techniques that help you not have to get the entire domain model right the first time. Because like this is a thing that I've experienced a lot in the last month in particular, but is definitely true of DDD, is that it's impossible to get the domain right the first time. So don't try. Like just work with the domain, and as you find things that are like incorrect about your model, stop and fix them. And like you'll feel it get a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And then like he describes in the book, at some point you'll feel these huge shifts where like something snaps and all of a sudden you've gotten rid of 2/3 of your code and everything is so much simpler and easier to understand. And that's the thing you're going for with domain-driven design. And so like you distinguish it from like lean, which is more of like a workflow kind of thing, or like a how do we make sure that we are doing exclusively value-added activities, those kinds of things. And agile, which is specifically about iteratively adding value and like is some of those kinds of things. Domain-driven design, I think, is like one level bigger than that, where it's incorporating your understanding of the problem that you're solving also. But like all of them are compatible. You don't do like DDD versus agile or versus lean. All of these are like different facets of the same rock.
So it feels like it feels like, and what you say, like subtle or supple or
Supple, which as Dreith pointed out in Denver Devs the other day, is like a really shitty like term for that. It's like moist or something. It's just a uncomfortable word, but SUPPLE, supple.
Supple. Okay, yeah, I was like trying to remember what that was, because you mentioned it was like only a paragraph in the entire book, essentially.
No. It's the second half of the book.
It's the entire second half. Okay.
Yeah. And like it's a really important idea in there. Like the supple design part of the book talks about like specific OO techniques for like achieving a design that tolerates radical refactors, which you need to do in domain-driven design. And so, for example, a supple design pattern is like turns like a long-standing OO axiom on its head, where the OO axiom is tell, don't ask. So rather than say, I have this collaborator and I want to like grab this value out of it so that I do the calculation, I want them to do the calculation and I don't want to know anything about it. So the way that it works in domain-driven design, the way a supple design would handle that same problem is your collaborator should still do the calculation, but you should be very loosely coupled to it. So like whatever information your collaborator needs, rather than making them a member of your object, you get whatever primitive values that you need and then just pass them to a method of that object. So now you've dramatically reduced the coupling between these two objects. So if that other object gets replaced by a library or just gets thrown away entirely, that's that much less code that's affected by that. That's a supple design idea.
Okay, it sounds like there's some similarities to like solid, because like in OOP solid, there's a lot of decoupling that would happen there also, where we say like, okay, I don't need to be part of your parent. I just want an interface. And that way you could be called with maybe a wrapper or something else. That way testing can work out better. You know, what is it like? Injection can work a little bit better. Is that similar to that, or is it? Or
they're related, because like solid was an Uncle Bob thing, and this came out of the exact same community. So they were exploring a lot of the same kinds of ideas, but like a difference between like something that is part of a supple design but is not necessarily part of solid is intention revealing interfaces. And this is one of these things that's like insane that you'd even have to say it because like we just do these things now. But this is like descriptive variable names and like using your domain language as the names of the arguments in your methods and stuff. By doing that, when your domain changes, you see the domain term that you're using as a parameter or whatever. It's like, well, it's not really a post anymore. It's more of like a post ID maybe, but like you get alerted to the code not reflecting the domain by your choice of variable names and stuff. That's not really a part of solid, but it's a compatible idea.
Interesting. Danny suggests that we rename decoupling to desuppling.
Nice. Well done.
So something else that you were talking about sort of like reminds me, and I forget the law. What's the law where the communication structure that you have is Conway's law. That's right. So like there's a lot there of like, okay, match your communication structure with your clients, and then you'll be able to write the code, understand the domain, and actually do the thing better for them, which is very similar to like not just the communication language, but also pathways.
Yes.
Which is what Conway's law.
No, absolutely. So like for the audience, Conway's law is that the structure of like a process or a product or whatever will reflect the structure of the system that produced it. So if there's like a 3-phase thing in producing a product, that will be reflected in the end result. Like the end result will have 3 different parts to it. Or there'll be 3 different systems or something like that. But the outputs mirror the structure of the system that made them. And so the more that you flatten that, the more that you integrate that, like all those kinds of things, that also gets reflected in your product. So if you have very like empowered, integrated folks that work together in like these almost magical emergent ways, that will also be the case in your product, which is probably more the kind of thing that like your customers want.
Yeah, generally. Let's see. So where something that like is making me think about the supple implementing supple design would actually be considered like, would that be the right use of the word, or like supple something programming?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it's a characteristic of your code base is like, all right, if I need to make a radical change, how onerous is that? How many other dependent systems do I also need to change, and how hard is it to change those? That's kind of what you're going for with like the supple design kind of thing. So, for example, um, this is this is one that I'm doing like right now. Is I've been using Playwright for end-to-end testing, and like I'm actually really frustrated with it. It's like I was a Cypress guy for a long time, and I'm trying to. There's some things that I feel like the Cypress crew, we just view the purpose of that tool slightly differently. I would like CLI to be more of a first class citizen. I would like to be at a little bit less heavy, like how it installs your entire folder structure for you. And if you change a thing, it'll do it a second, third, and fourth time. And like, I want it to be a little bit lighter. And like, I'd love to bring some of my other testing kinds of things. Like I mentioned this in some channel today, but I feel like testing library, the Kelsey Dodds thing, is amazing. I think he should get a Nobel Prize for like how much that has pushed like unit testing forward. Because there's so many things that are pinched from like either pure OO paradigms that don't really apply to any of this. And the way that it focuses component design on things like accessibility and like it's so difficult to test something useless that I love it. And so like I teach testing, and I would like to have like one testing language that like I'm teaching new folks is like it works this way, whether you're teaching a function or whether you're testing a function or a component or the entire application, it just fractals the whole way. And Pathwright or Playwright kind of felt like my road to that, as I got so excited about it. And I've been using it for a month now, and it is driving me fucking crazy. Like, I cannot get testing library to work with it. So I have to use like their awful assertions and their awful like element selection system. And then so now I don't really have any benefit to using Jest anymore. So CLI is a first class citizen. It like doing cross browser testing is crazy easy. Like a lot of those things are there, so like I don't want to throw in the hat like right away, but they have their own test runner that I kind of want to give a shot anyway. Like ripping that out, like nothing else in my application changes from that, which is nice. So like that's a benefit. Or something like in the app. One of the things that changed over my understanding of the app that I'm building right now over the last month, so it's an LMS, it's a like education content app, is in my original domain model for it, it's like, all right, well, there's a program, and a program can have many units, and each unit can have sections, and each section has topics. And a topic can either be like a reading or an exercise. So like that was my original model for this. And the more that I worked with it, I was like, you know what? That's actually not true at all. These are really all the exact same thing. They're just posts. They're posts that have child posts. And so as I like stopped when I was working on it, I was like, oh, this makes way more sense to think of it more like a post. That was one of those like big snap moments where I was like, oh, everything is so much easier. I have to do so much less code gymnastics to make this work. And now I can do things like have arbitrary like numbers of levels of these things. And that ended up actually simplifying my navigation as I was like trying to figure out rules for what next means and something with nested navigation like that. Like the difference between solving a code problem and solving like a user domain problem became very intermixed, like in a really good way. And so I felt like I was really solving a human problem, and like the code was always reflecting that. And the more that you do this, I think this is probably like one of the ideas that triggered you wanting to have this conversation, was that certain parts of the architecture get more firm over time and less changeable. And certain parts of them, the parts that you keep changing as your understanding of it changes, those get more flexible. So you end up with something that kind of has like this shape where it's not fluid. That's not accurate. It's more that like wherever the joints are and where it bends, those are the parts that you probably change a lot as you understand stuff differently. And that's a good thing. That makes it easier to do in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to know. Let's see. We got some questions in chat. So
Cool.
one quick one. Viable Clan member asked, what did you move to from Jest?
So I am still using Jest and Playwright for my end-to-end stuff right now. What I hope to do later today is move them to Playwright Test, which is Playwright's like official test runner. It's just Jest also. It's like a wrapper around it. But like it's a different it's a different assertion system. Like, and God, Playwright's assertions are so bad. Testing library kind of spoils you a little bit on some of this stuff. Like the errors are useless. It'll be like timed out. Okay, because what? Like, which step of the test did you get to before it timed out? Like, that's like none of those kinds of things, which I find frustrating. And Cypress was way good about that stuff. And testing library can do a lot of this, but it's not a browser. And so it doesn't have a clipboard. It doesn't have forward and back. Like there's just a lot of those kinds of things that even if you were like willing to let a lot of things go, it's not an end-to-end test, like not even close. So all that's kind of frustrating. I don't have a great solution to this right now. What I'm hoping is that just switching to the Playwright test runner will at least make this a lot less frustrating. But if it doesn't, I might just go back to Cypress because like it's an awful syntax. And like, again, to go back, I wanted to teach people the one syntax to rule them all. That would be really helpful. And the Cypress syntax is bonkers. Like it's pure magic. It looks like JavaScript, but it's not actually JavaScript at all. And it's very difficult to teach, but like, I don't know, it's not impossible to learn. And so once you do, like it worked fine. I don't know. I'm very frustrated with that part of it. Meanwhile, I love Jest and testing library everywhere else in the stack. Like I've never been happier with a testing tool before.
Viable Clan member also suggests that, hey, there's Cypress CTs. That might be an option to look into too.
Well, that's news to me. What's Cypress CT?
I have no idea. It's the first I've heard of it too.
Well, because like I mentioned that like CLI first class citizen, that's a valuable thing to me in an end-to-end test runner. I spent a lot of my time SSH'd into boxes and we're like, I don't always have a GUI that I can use. And like my whole like IDE system is all command line, and so and including all of my other tests. And so I'd really like to just have those kind of all in one place. And the Cypress folks have been pretty clear that like, hey, we have a CLI runner for CI, but like we really, really, really want you to use our GUI for everything. And we did such a good job on it. Don't you want to use it? And it's a fine GUI. Like it's all right, but I don't know. I end up not being able to like do those tests when I'm on the train. Like that's stupid.
It seems to be a Cypress component test runner. So less end-to-end, more unit testing.
No, so that would go the other direction. Is like if I'm looking for one like testing language to rule them all, maybe that could be Cypress. But man, like I really want testing library in my life. I'm just so happy with it. I really think Kent Dodds did like a great job on the design of that.
A while ago, Danny asked, is the actor model an implementation of Supple design?
I don't know. I don't know the actor model.
All right. Yeah, it's been a while since I looked into like actor model too much. I think I've accidentally done actor model a couple times, but like never on purpose, so I can't answer that either, fortunately.
No, I don't do a ton of OO stuff and kind of never have. I don't do none. I taught a lot of Java in the last year. I'm going to be teaching Java in this program coming up. I taught Ruby, like I taught Rails really at Flatiron, but I've never been an OO guy, and all the time that I've spent with it has not convinced me that I should I should do anything different on that. Um, and so there's a lot of those, and this was actually like kind of eye-opening to me. And this was a lot of this was from the domain-driven design book too. Is like, oh, so much of this is solving problems that only exist because of this paradigm. But like you read through these things, is like, oh, you don't have functions. It's like no shit, you have to fucking be really disciplined about this, or like you like primitive values work so strangely like in your in this paradigm. And so like there's a concept of like value objects is like you need an entire object to like wrap a string, and that makes it safer to use in these other scenarios. And I remember that was so hard when I was learning software engineering because I'd see shit like that all the time. And then I'm writing like JavaScript or something like that, and I was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to be solid. And like, God, that drives me nuts too. And people tell JavaScript engineers like, oh yeah, I got a solid principles. It's like that is purely an OO thing. Like interface segregation doesn't matter if you don't have interfaces. Um, so yeah, I didn't know where I was going with that, but I'm
Um,
not. I go deep. I wouldn't say I go deep with functional programming either. Like, but I am not super well versed on OO stuff.
let's see. Another question that just came in was, what organization rules do we stand by when it comes to developers writing text?
So my answer to that would be, well, there's the 4 agile testing quadrants, where it's um, uh, like business facing or like code facing. So like a business facing test would be something like it's accessible. And a code facing test would be like when I give this function these 2 inputs, I get this 1 output out. And then fuck, I already forgot the other axis that the quadrants work on. But basically, like what I would insist on if I get to be a dictator for a software team is that devs write their own tests to like ensure that the thing does what they think it does. It is absolutely not a QA person's job to make sure that like your code works. But I still think that there's value in having like a test expert. But what they do when they're not worried about making sure that like something that you said was done is actually done is weird stuff. All right. If somebody is using an old version of this one browser that had this funny quirk, what happens? Is that a security vulnerability? Is there an opportunity to handle this differently? Are these are the user flows to this program good? Are they what they think? Are they what we think they are? Also, things like that I think devs can like. I don't think any of this stuff is like rocket science. And I think that like devs can and should be more familiar with this than they like as a group kind of are. Things like performance testing. So like at what point does this design break on our current architecture? That's a valuable thing for like a test expert to be able to contribute on. Accessibility is another one that like, it's not that that's not a dev's responsibility, but like I think that devs should be using tools like Axe to like make that a part of their development workflow, but that only catches so much. And so I think there is value in having an accessibility expert take a look at your program and figure out how it could be better. And so the particular division that I want is a tester should never be a gatekeeper for a release. Those should just be happening as soon as something is done. And there should be a tester or testers who are looking critically at the app and figuring out how do we make it better. And usually on those, I remember the other axis was functional and non-functional. So non-functional is things like performance tests and accessibility and whatever. If you are going to have testers in your organization, I think that that's where they add value, not telling your devs whether or not the thing that they claimed was done was actually done. That whole like guess and check approach is like a very broken approach to quality. And it's something that W. Edwards Deming wrote a ton about. He described it as making toast. I'll burn it, you scrape. And I think that like that burn and scrape model is like really common in software teams. And I don't endorse that at all.
I for my answer, I sort of like follow with like the flow system, which comes from TPS, which stands for Toyota Production System sort of methodology, which also comes directly from Deming. So it's still the same source.
Correct.
The idea here would be TPS reports, yes. The idea here would be that the flow through the system is much more important than the efficiency of any one individual or like one
100%.
column in your entire Jira board. Because
Absolutely.
as you said at the beginning, in progress doesn't matter, doesn't count. It doesn't matter how many things we have in progress. We're only paid for things that are shipped. So therefore, if a ticket has to move backwards in a Jira board because like QA found a problem with it, now we have to go and rework it. That is a huge productivity problem if you now have something else happening, because now it has to wait behind something that is potentially less important than the thing that you had done before, but now you can't do it. And so therefore, just do it right the first time, maybe pair with QA, like get everyone in a room together. That would be much better and much faster in the long run than just having, as you said, some gatekeeper come in and try to QA something in after you've bolted it and turned it into a black box.
And like the idea too that you're incredibly highly paid expert engineer, well, they didn't catch this thing, but I don't know, maybe the like tester that we pay a third as much, well, it's really important, so we'll make sure that like they're the one standing in the line. Like that doesn't make any sense at all. And like I think that it is the software industry kind of infantilizes devs a little bit with this kind of thing, where like, oh, we don't want to make you do any of that like boring, unfun work. We'll hire somebody cheap to take care of that. But like this stuff is quality, and I think it's reasonable to like insist that engineers have a higher standard for like when they think they're done.
That actually comes out from I recently read The Goal, which is like huge lean thing, and that sort of like feeling of like, oh, we can't have them doing this like something that we could pay somebody 1/3 of that value for. That comes from like this idea of everyone needs to be kept busy. It is which is opposed, like the opposition that's never mentioned is as opposed to shipping the right things at the right time.
Yes. Because like there's two big problems with the gatekeeping thing, aside from everything else that we talked about. One is now you have inventory. You have work that is otherwise finished. It's just sitting around waiting to be deployed, not generating money, not generating value, not making customers happy, not fixing the bug that somebody complained about, and potentially getting stale and no longer becoming relevant as the code base continues to evolve. Because like, all right, well, now the code base kept going while we were waiting for this thing to get tested. And now if we did apply that patch, it would break everything because it's not the same code base anymore. Or we don't even have that feature anymore. So, all right, well, then you didn't need to do that work. Like, get the stuff out immediately. The other thing that it does is it slows down your learning. Like, because I think when people hear do it right the first time, they immediately turtle into like mega planning. And like, it's not that. It's more, I think of it more as like, do what you were intending to do like the first time, while accepting that that might not be the right thing. And so maybe you release that thing and your customers don't like it. Or you find some other like unforeseeable reason why like it didn't work or you should have rethought it or whatever else. Learn that now. Like, don't wait to learn that. So yeah, like having any kind of queue waiting for release, that's a recipe for sadness.
So one of the things that I was really hoping to be able to do with supple design is sort of like work with a problem that we've noticed in my teams that I've worked with, and just in general with the design sprint part of things, which is you can bring in the customers, you could bring in subject matter experts on the things that you're doing. You can learn the language, you can get all like the domain, knowledge down, but the actual like problem that's being solved at a very like, base level, it's sometimes I find that the people that like we're bringing in aren't engaged. You can't really fully engage them. And you exit the design interview with a solid plan that everyone agrees is actually solves the problem. And then when you start, actually building the thing and it's like, oh, well, I wasn't actually paying attention during all of those design sprint meetings. No, it's different that I need. And I was like, but then the rewrite sort of like mentality, does this help offset the risk essentially of getting it right in the design sprint?
Sure. So like design sprints and MVPs are both tools for answering questions. They're not tools for making software. And both of them have tests kind of built into them that a lot of people skip. And it's like, whoa, that was the entire value of this whole thing. That's what gives you confidence in the answer to the question. So like in a design sprint, you have 5 days to see whether or not you can come up with an idea for a difficult problem. So you have all of the people who like might work on this and might be affected by this, and customer representatives and all these kinds of people in it. But like the last day and a half, 2 days, I think, of the design sprint are like, you need to actually use the prototype that you made in a real situation. So like the thing from the book was a like automated delivery system. And the prototype that they did was like a little robot butler that was actually just like a remote controlled car or something like that. And they put the like, hey, we have a new automated room service system. So the hotel puts that on the thing. Somebody calls up and goes, oh yeah, I'd like a cake. And so the design sprint thing was like, all right, we took a little remote controlled car and we put a cake on top of it and we drove it over to the door. And then we asked the person, like, how was that? From the user's perspective, that was the product. It was a real thing. It looked exactly how it will actually look if and when they actually do this. It was just all fake. Like there's somebody standing around the corner of the hotel driving the car. And like MVPs work the exact same way. Where like you did, if nobody bought it, like you didn't test the viability of it. The whole point is that like you have answered the question whether or not this is a viable product by doing the minimum amount of work. But in both cases, All of this happens totally independently of software development. You come out of like an MVP or like a design sprint with more confidence in your knowledge, and then you start working on your code base or whatever else. It's like when people think of the MVP or a design sprint or something, it's like, what's the shittiest possible thing that we could make in the least amount of time? And then we'll make that the base for our app. And like, that's not what either of those tools are. They're marketing tools, not software development tools.
Right. And I guess like there may be a slight difference in like a lot of the tools that I'm making are internal tools and not for like
Sure.
external paying customers. And so therefore like, yeah, it gets so hard to get people to like be part of the ceremonies of the design sprint, to like be part of that design process.
Oh yeah, dude. Well, and Jake Knapp talks about it in that book too. Is like those people need to be fully committed for the entire week. They can't have any other work. They can't check their email. They can't do anything else. Like I think he underscored that one a few times. It's not something you drop in and out of. And it's like as soon as, especially the executive sponsor, which I think is one of the required roles in design sprints, is like if they insist on like, well, I'll just pop in. Well, how about I come in at the end, or you just ask me questions once a day? It's like that will not work. That's not what this is. And like for internal tools, like you can still MVP that kind of stuff. You can do it the same sort of way, or be like, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we had a system like this? And like you present some kind of interface that would be how your other team members or whatever would use that. And then you're just around the corner, like typing stuff out in real time and kind of making it look like it came from an API or something like that. It's like, all right, if that were real, does that solve the problem? That's that kind of like MVP design sprint kind of mindset.
Right. Let's see. So if I wanted to try to start with like Supple design in like my next project, so let's imagine
Sure.
that I want to, for this, make a, I don't know, I do like a lot of educational type things here on the channel. So let's say I was going to make a Brooks Builds website where you can go and like get courses from.
Sure.
Where would I start with
that? So I think that what that looks like when you're doing a project is spending a lot less time, not no time, but a lot less time designing where the system's going to go. And so you spend a lot more time, what's the next valuable thing that I can do? And then you do that. And then you look at the result and you go, cool, did that help or not? And then if it did, cool, what's the next thing? And try to be guided by that rather than like, I don't even think this is a terrible way to make software. It's just not really the Supple design idea, where like you have like a laundry list of prioritized features, and then you kind of work on them one after another. And then you sort of skeleton in an architecture that you think will work for all of those. The Supple design idea is like you incur inventory and risk by trying to guess that too much ahead of time. So take your time savings from not doing some of those things and reinvest it in continually rewriting your app. And like, you need to like kind of be honest with yourself about what's happening there, because it feels like, having just done it, a lot of it feels like I don't have time for this, but like that is design work. And so you're combining your development and your design activities into one. And as you go like, God, this is so awkward to work with. I hate this. Like, rather than, well, let me finish all of this first and then I'll go back to it. Like, that's when you hit the brakes and like redesign the app. And like this, especially like early on, it thrashes a lot more. But it's also like not as hard to change things. Because like almost by definition, your app doesn't do that much yet. So even if you needed to completely rewrite the API, I don't know how many endpoints you have by that point. So, and if it's a lot, if that's too scary, you maybe went too far. Or if you do have a lot of parts of it that work and like one part that doesn't, I don't know, maybe that means that should be a different service. But kind of getting in that mindset where you're trusting yourself to make these decisions in real time rather than like buying into the delusion that you'll predict it all right up front. Because I think that like devs sort of have like a desire for this, and certainly their managers do, to like, well, I just want to run in a straight line. I just want to code for a while. I don't want to have to continually reevaluate this architecture. And so this is the opposite of that. And I would compare it more to like playing jazz versus playing a piano recital, where like piano recital, the step, it go here to here to here to here to here. Whereas jazz, there's things happening in my environment and I'm reacting to them. And sometimes that means radically changing direction, but it's not changing focus. You're still trying to do the same ultimate goal. You just aren't making yourself make a bunch of architectural decisions up front. And like part of a legitimate trade-off with this is you might end up with an architecture that makes sense how you got there evolutionarily, but maybe isn't ideal for whatever reason. And then like at some point, I don't know, you make a trade-off on that is like, all right, well, is there value in this point at this point and re-architecting something that maybe does have a lot of features in it? And if there is, do it and don't feel bad about it, because the we've done the ballpoint game before, like classic agile game. One of the questions, so I've done that exercise 50 times. And it's a team exercise for people in the stream. It's a team exercise where you have, I don't know, 10 to 30 people, and they have a bunch of balls that need to move around in a particular configuration. And you give them 5 chances to do it under like very tight time constraints. And inevitably, every single time I've retroed that one, I ask them, all right, does anybody think that they would have done a better job on that if I'd given you all of the planning time from all the iterations up front and then only one iteration, or double that or triple it? And not a single person has like ever not enthusiastically gone like, oh, no way, absolutely no way. We needed to do it a few times and try some stuff to really see like what the problems were. And that is like supple design, or at least my understanding of it, kind of distilled, where like even if you are re-architecting something, you're going to do such a better job of it. You're going to get to like a better answer so much faster because of your experience and pain and whatever else working with the domain. That's a feature, not a bug.
So this is actually a great question from Viable Clan member that sort of like follow up on this is, let's say we wanted to create our team and have it, you know, revolve around DDD. Mm-hmm. What would the ideal team composition be for that?
Sure. So like this just gets to straight agile. And generally you want a self-sufficient team, whatever that means in this context. So I think in a lot of software contexts, it would be something like you probably need some design skills on the team. You probably need some like deeper than average testing expertise. You probably need some front-end expertise, some back-end expertise, some like somebody who like knows the domain pretty well. And like, but these aren't a front-end engineer and a back-end engineer and a tester and a designer. Like that's not it at all. You need those skills to be present. And I don't know why the software industry has such a hard time with this. People can do more than one thing. That's not the same as necessarily being an expert in everything. Like I've known a lot of designers in particular who like at agencies who are like very naturally great data modelers. And so like they also end up co-specializing in database stuff. And that totally makes sense because like they're very similar activities. Figuring how the hierarchy of like things on in a visual design are, what they mean to each other. Like this is literally data modeling. It's just doing it with like graphic design rather than databases. Or like, especially anymore, like front end and back end development are not like wildly different skills. Um, and like maybe like I don't like using the term DevOps for this because it's a philosophy, not a role, but any like operations chops that you need to have. I know that like all 6, 7, 8 people on your team need to be Docker experts, but having one or two people who are like pretty fluent in that, I think that helps everything else and probably helps everybody else level up in that too. And so when you're looking at team composition, think about like, what skills do we need to deliver complete units of work? What do we need to be able to iterate really quickly on architectures like this? And I think things like mob programming and like lots of other stuff contribute to this also. But think of it in terms of skills that are present or not with your people. And then rather than, oh, so we need to get different people, maybe it's a question of, do I need to get somebody on this team those skills? Or maybe you need different people. But like my team composition thing is figure out what you need to ship in complete units and try to assemble those skills in some kind of configuration on with your folks.
Yeah, in a way, like we as software engineers already have to learn new skill sets constantly just because
Totally.
new things are coming out. So like, why does it always have to be in the same domain?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, like we're already good at learning new things. I can learn a new thing about something else. Plus, if we have side projects, it's not like you have another team member, to rely on. Like you, Kyle, you're doing all your stuff solo, so you don't have anybody else.
Right. And like, yeah, if I had like more people that I could work with, um, I've been doing visual design now for 6 or 7 years. I'm like, I don't know, I'm not terrible at it. Like at this point, it's still like a little foreign to me. And all of this came out of like honestly a really similar need. It was like, oh well, I can do this and this. You're going to need to get a designer for this. I can do this and this. You're going to need a designer for this. I just said it one too many times for my career comfort. And I was like, all right, man, if there was somebody who could design and also do what I can do, I'd be kind of fucked, wouldn't I? So I started like getting into design. And then it was like, oh, this is making me a better software engineer too. And it's making me structure like the ubiquitous language and some of the deep modeling ideas from DDD totally related to this. When you've looked at a problem from the interface to the underlying data model to how it flows through the system and everywhere in between, you know the shit out of that domain. And so I've gotten a lot of just pure software engineering benefits out of that also. But I don't know, it's still always going to be a little bit more foreign than code is. Testing's the same way. Like testing probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, no, I want to get super good at this. And like, I'm pretty passable at it now. There's still some stuff that like I'm not awesome at. Docker is another one of those, like any kind of DevOpsy sort of thing. I'm pretty passable with like CI/CD pipelines and stuff now. But anybody who had deeper expertise in any of those areas and maybe didn't have as much expertise in React or some other thing that I'm really good at, that would be like the next team member that I would want. Is like, all right, where am I a little bit weaker? But it wouldn't be, I don't want a designer. I don't want a DevOps person. Like, I think that's the wrong mindset. I want somebody who can make up for some of my shortcomings and can contribute in some of the areas where I'm strong. Because like, I don't know, 6 months working together, that's how both of us get a like level up at all of those things. And it's not like, oh, can you go design this real quick? It's like, I'd like just a smarter person to talk to about these designs in real time. There you go. That's my team composition take.
So that reminds me a lot of Ray Dalio's book Principles. I don't know if you've read that. He talked about at his company, which I forget what its name is. They use baseball cards, like they call them baseball cards, which is basically like a profile on everybody at the company along with a list of skills that person has. And then you can
Mhm.
form your teams based upon what the lack of skill. So you can see like, oh, I don't have this skill, but we want something else. We want this one over here because we have like 3 people with like just tiny little bit of it, and we need more, and we have like 20 people with like this one. Let's not hire for that anymore. Let's hire for the one we don't have.
Mhm.
That reminds me of that, like tracking that, being aware of what skills we don't have and what we do have could be really helpful.
Oh, 100%. And like that's becoming a more and more common thing on teams, especially agencies. I see do that a lot, where they have skills matrices across their company. Um, and like I totally love it. I think that's a good way to do it. And what gets tricky about it though, like I understand like the challenge of this is really like more of a company thing. If I'm on like a 5-person team, I don't know that we need to be that formal about it. We could just get to know each other better and like maybe figure some of those things out. Because it turns into like, well, I'm on there as like knowing design. And so then I'm somebody's design solution. And I go, I don't know, I could be like, like I'm not as good as like, so Alex Dreith on Never Devs, like we have very similar skill sets, but I'm a developer who picked up some design. He's an MFA who like learned development. And so they end up like both of us might have the same baseball card, but we don't necessarily offer the same thing. And so like that's and like whatever, it doesn't need to be like something that's programmable. But like that is, I think, a challenge of trying to come up with a system that accurately tells you who should be on what teams. And they change over time too. Like you might be super nervous about something, and then you do one project, and you're like, oh shit, that's where we're at. Never mind. I'm apparently like the king of DevOps around here. Or I don't know, something like that. So I think there's some risk in trying to formalize it too much, but as a concept, I'm way into it.
Yeah, I like it too, as long as it doesn't, well, it goes back with like the metrics thing. As long as it doesn't become something that pushes people for,
Yeah.
because that's where that like, okay, the classic example here would be stack ranking that Microsoft did, that
Right.
almost completely decimated Microsoft. And
Totally.
a quick introduction to stack ranking, which was managers were told, okay, here, have I want you to order all of your employees in order of skill from top to bottom and rank them. So like stack them up, rank them in a list. And then we're going to give like the top 20% a raise, and the bottom 20% will just be fired regardless. And that's how they were going to ensure they only had the top 20% of all developers in the world working for them. But fun fact, that backfired quite heavily, and it basically became a political nightmare company for a
Mhm.
while.
Actually, oh man, so there's a related idea. That's like effectively what grades are too, and people don't think of them that way. But as Brooks knows, I am violently opposed to grades. Um, like the idea that, well, this person got an 83 and this person got an 87, and that's meaningful. Like that's a so as an educator, like I think that shit's stupid. So there's no way you can reduce the complexities of human performance down to like I call it math laundering. Whereas like, all right, well now I have a number, so now we can figure out who the best people in the company are. But like garbage in, garbage out, and that's garbage in. So yeah, I think that does have a lot of those risks. And I talked to somebody kind of recently that really wanted me to do some grades, and like, yeah, we're gonna have you run this little workshop. And like, yeah, can we just like score people at the end? And I didn't want to do it. And the way that I framed it, that seemed to work pretty well, is like, do you believe that like attractiveness can meaningfully be measured, like the 1 to 10 thing? Like, no, it's sexist and insulting and like just total bullshit. It's like, awesome, that's what grades are. When you try to, oh, this is a B student, or this is, they got a 3.4 GPA, which means they're a little bit worse than somebody got a 3.5. Like, it's all bullshit. People, like, your performance, your intellect, all these things are so contextual. And so when I do corporate trainings and stuff, it's like, no, I won't score your people. That doesn't mean I won't evaluate them. Like, I'm an evaluation nut. Love coming up with effective ways to do evaluation. And I can make recommendations like, I think this person would be really successful in this kind of environment on this sort of team, especially if like, there's not a whole lot of other people for them to kind of get intimidated by or something. Like, there's all of those kinds of factors. Or like, I don't know, I'm loud and swear a lot. Like, in situations where like I can't do that, surprise, I don't perform super fucking well. So like, anyway, that tangent, I forget what we're talking about.
So let's see. I wanna mention, even if not necessarily answering, viable clan member. I noticed you were chatting with everybody else about trying to find domain-driven design like ESLint plugins.
I don't know that you could do something like that. And really, like, it, he says as much in the book. You kind of can't do pure DDD outside of a pure OO context. And like, so he talked, this took me a while to figure out too. He goes on this tirade against smart UIs. And I was like, oh, you're talking about how all web apps work right now, where like, your React components have the bulk of the logic in them, and like really just kind of interacting with a stupid API. And so if you were trying to do like the domain-driven design of the book, like it is before an interface is even discussed, you have a bunch of models and they talk to each other and all these kinds of things. And so like that's what I meant by like a lot of the ideas I don't think aged or like, or at least are not entirely relevant for web app development. But the idea of ubiquitous language, that one's huge. I don't think you can put that into a linting plugin. Or like some of the other things that like enable a supple design, like those are concrete programming patterns, but like they're so philosophical that I don't think you can lint those either. I don't know that you could have a linting rule that's like, I see that you're doing that you have a collaborator that you could be passing primitive values to. That gets super interpretive because it's not like no object should ever have a direct collaborator. It's more that like you should in general try to see if there's ways that you can reduce coupling with primitives.
Like,
I don't know if that's lintable.
For example, if statements in functional programming should be avoided, but sometimes you can't.
Right. Well, side effect free function calls, that's also part of supple design. That's lintable. But like everything like that, you probably already have as a linting rule. But the book's 20 fucking years old. There's a lot of this stuff that we just call software engineering now.
Let's see. Next question was, how do teams get made? Well, maybe before I go to this, it's been over an hour. How much time do you have, Kyle?
I'm with you, baby.
All right. Well, so the next
question... hang on. Let me get another beer. Can I do that?
Okay, let's take a super quick break and we'll be back in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
All right, I'm gonna go take a break and refill my water too. I'll be right back. I'm still. All right. Let's see. What are you drinking tonight, Kyle?
I was drinking the Claw. I am currently drinking Vodka, and I will soon be drinking Pilsner. Prost Pilsner too, which like I really like German style loggery kinds of things. And I think that Prost doesn't the best. They're not my favorite brewery. My favorite brewery is Comrade. But for like German style stuff, man, Prost does it right.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't been drinking in a long time since I had that concussion. But one day, like my favorite beers were always the Belgium. I
Mm,
would go for those, especially if there's like sort of like fruity styles. Those are my
sure.
favorite. I want good flavors. All right.
Nice.
So our next question, which I thought was really interesting, is how do teams get made? Should the team lead select people to join? So like interview, hire, or
Mm,
do
totally.
the managers assign?
Oh, this is a super good question. Um, so here's the challenge. When you pick your team, in large part, at least it's a risk, you also pick your architecture. So there's somebody who worked on a team where the dev team was like 3 raw SQL database people, no other programming skills, but like very good at TSQL, can like program in that environment. So guess what every single one of their apps was? It was like a T-SQL for everything all the way down. I saw some of these queries, man, and holy shit, like at one point I thought I was like a SQL guy. I can't follow like a line of this stuff. They even did like a lot of Oracle PLSQL stuff once upon a time. But if you hire a team of 3 database people, guess what the main part of your app is going to be? So like that's the challenge of like trying to handpick all those folks ahead of time. Now, hiring a diverse group of people, I think does a lot to get around that. So I don't think that's impossible that like you couldn't handpick a team that would necessarily fall into that trap. Um, Really, like what I would love to see be more of a factor in team composition stuff is who gives a shit about this problem? And I think that like it's a simple question, but the reason it's hard to answer is that a lot of companies don't hire that way. They don't hire people who care about their problem. They hire like abstract bags of skills. And I think that's the wrong move. So like in education, you should not only hire people who like care about education, which everybody thinks they do, until they get near a classroom. You should hire people that care about your approach to education and think that like whatever mission that you're on is like one worth pursuing and ideally overlaps with their own mission. And I think that I've said this before. People will go, oh, well, you were easy for you to say you work in education. Education's so cool. And I'll tell you, man, like I've been in this business 20 years. Most people who work in education are like bitter, jaded, do not give a shit about it. Sometimes they still tell themselves they're like, yeah, but I still care about education, but like not in any actual sense. I think they've just told that lie to themselves long enough that like they started believing it. But even in stuff that like isn't necessarily that obviously cool or important or whatever, I think that when you look at where the value is being created, why is somebody paying for this? Like if somebody is willing to work and earn money and then trade that money for this thing, it has some value. And what companies will do is strip the value out of that by just treating everybody like abstract bags of skills. And so like an example I've given before is I can't think of anything more boring than like Procter and Gamble, like the sort of like consumer staples, giant enterprise, like that does not turn my gears at all. But I think there's a lens of looking at that, whereas like, all right, let's say you needed to solve the challenge of getting soap all over the world, like at a massive scale. You need to get soap to 8 billion people. And if you can find a way to do it half a penny cheaper, like that literally saves people's lives. Now you've got kind of a cool problem, and you can find people that like are motivated by that and think that's cool. If they're close enough to the impact of their work, and you let them get close enough to the impact of their work where they feel like that's the actual problem they're solving, rather than the problem I'm solving is trying to get a raise and not getting fired, which is, I think, how a lot of those organizations end up being. But I don't think that's a requirement that it ends up being that way. So like, that's constraint number one. If you hire a group of people with diverse backgrounds who care about this one problem and are interested in the company's like mission and how they're approaching that problem, and they have a diverse group of skills, I think you're in pretty good shape at that point. Failing that, I would say it's also totally reasonable to start a team with 1 or 2 people and then ask them, all right, so I want y'all to like get to the point where you've done valuable work, something that has been released. And then at that point, figure out, what do you feel like you're shy on? And is that something that is more people? Is that training? Is that consultants? Because like, that's the other thing, is like, oh yeah, well, what about when you need a deep expert? Awesome. Do they need to be a part of the team? Like when I hire a plumber, that's something that like nobody in my family like necessarily has expertise in, and it's something that we badly need. They don't join our family like because they successfully unclogged the toilet or whatever. So like, all right, cool, you really do need a specialist, like hire a mercenary, no problem with that. But letting the people who are on the team drive some of that, because like the funniest thing I've seen in management recently, as I heard somebody who was like, companies going through an agile transformation, and I heard that we're supposed to have self-organizing teams. So how do I self-organize this team? And I think a lot of folks sort of approach it that way. And like, so self-organization, I think it's tricky because like it can't immaculately conceive itself. But for that first step, I think either of those are completely viable approaches.
And then Misery Lev mentioned one thing that you didn't mention, which I think is important, which is having 2 or 3 people that have an amazing working relationship is
Mhm.
way
Oh,
more
hard agree.
valuable than 3 individual strangers.
Totally. So we talked about this in, I think, industry opinions and on Never Devs a little bit today, where like I understand exactly why people really shit on the like, well, we're a family, like startup trope, but that doesn't mean that like it's not or can't or shouldn't be true that teams are families. It's like, this is Simon Sinek's like whole thing, and I think he's done pretty decent like social sciences research on it. It's like, your brain treats like your work team exactly like a family. It's not even a metaphor. Like, it does not distinguish from like an anthropological level between I'm stuck, I'm working on this team, I'm hunting with the hunting group in the tribe, I'm stranded on a starship with a ragtag crew of people with troubled past with big hearts. Like that, and the people you're biologically related to, your brain doesn't preference one over the other. It does like ones that you have longer relationships, more like positive affiliations, like some of those kinds of things, which is often true of biological families, but like that's not universally true. And if you talk to somebody who's had like a shitty family relationship, or like abusive parents or anything like that, the whole like, no, and then the CEO said we're a family, and then he fired half of us and like did this, like that is on brand. That also happens in families. It's not just the warm fuzzy parts. And so if you're trying to like assemble a group of people that are interested in entering like a family-ish kind of relationship, I think that's absolutely like a worthwhile thing to put priority on.
Yeah, it's and then right before I get to Viable Clan members trying to bring it back to DDD, one thing, like, and this is for like new managers, a piece of advice that I think is terrible is like, don't get close, don't get to know your direct reports very well, because what if you have to fire them? That's going to be emotionally devastating to you. And
Sure.
my counter to that is, well, yeah, it's going to be emotionally devastating, but how can we possibly expect to get the work done that we need to do if we're not like actually working together? Like I can't just distantly emotion my like become a robot towards this person. I'm going to just treat them like, well, a thing, a widget, which is,
Totally.
well, actually that might explain why half the managers are terrible.
Well, like, just imagine a parent saying that is like, I choose to not get that close emotionally to my kids because I think it negatively impacts my ability to guide them in the ways that they need to be guided. I don't want to have love or something like that kind of getting in the way of what needs to get done. And like, just imagine if they were like a drug addict and I needed to cut them off so they didn't have access to like money or something like that because it was just killing them. I would, it would just be emotionally devastating if something like that happened. And so to prevent that, I'm not going to make any emotional connection with them at all. And so like, it should be emotionally devastating to fire somebody off of a team. That doesn't mean it never happens, but sometimes, I don't know, it's like literally drug addiction. Like that's such a poor reason, I think, to not emotionally invest in people.
All right.
Like it's risky. Yeah, you're goddamn right. It's risky.
Okay, so viable clan member, and I put this question in the
Oh
Zoom
yeah,
chat.
I saw it.
Okay, so
The like relative past thing.
yeah, so here I'll put this down so everybody can see it too. Here, let me see. Can I make two? So this one right here. So the to beat the dead house would importing from dot 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 be a clear DDD smell.
I don't think so. I think that that kind of stuff is way too implementation and platform and idiom specific. Um, like I think the state of my app right now is like pretty good from like this like iterative modeling standpoint. I have those all over the place. Um, I don't think there's any particular way that you need to structure your app. It should just be reflective, like especially the names that you're using, because at some point, like we should be more influenced by like things like TypeScript best practices than we are by the domain. Like where exactly that is, like, all right, there's some like negotiation in there. But at some point, I would rather have you structure your app such that like another TypeScript developer can come in and like know where the fuck things are. Than like, a customer could come in and look at this code base and know where everything is. That's not quite as valuable. And it like this is also like an idea that was largely introduced by domain-driven design, and is now we just call it software engineering, is declarative style, which is like a really similar thing. Say like the thing that you want, not how you intend to get it. At some point, you need to say how somebody gets it, though. It's really just wrapping that in an interface that like is descriptive of your domain. But at some level, like it's a while loop. Like it's a very like non-domain specific thing. But if you've wrapped that in a like communicative wrapper, then like you've made it declarative, and that's kind of more what you're shooting for there.
So a viable clan member says makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Okay, so for the idea of like refactoring and like constant micro rewrites, which could be major
Mhm.
rewrites or just tiny rewrites
Mhm.
here and there, it feels to me that that would sort of eventually lend all of our code writing to be in a very sort of like component style way, or maybe like very
Yep.
message sending way. I'm thinking
Yes.
about I don't know if like Angular's sort of message system makes sense to like describe
Sure.
here, where it's basically, or maybe observer pattern might be a better way
Mhm.
to show is like, I did something, I'm going to send it out as an event. I don't care who
Right.
reads it. And
Totally.
that way, oh, I need to refactor these things because I need to change names to be the right domain. I need to like reorganize them into different places, but then everything is still like it's less work to refactor because they're still
Yes.
communicating through each other through this, you know, very like broad, not really caring about each other way. Is that true?
100%. So like that's loose coupling. Loose coupling isn't uncoupled. Like these things do still need to talk to each other some fucking how. We just want the mechanism by which they do that to be as lightweight as possible. Um, so like observer, great example of that. Like you can move that component wherever you want in the hierarchy. Like it still emits the same thing, still has the same subscribers. That is enabling like a lot of iterative architecture sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I have a lot of Rust viewers here. So to bring it into like the Rust side, there's this thing called channels where we could basically just send a message out. It's sort of like the Node.js event thing that I've never really played with, where basically you could just send a message out and then something could event emitter. I think that's what it is. Something could have the receiver for that, and then it just like, okay, well let me just wait and see if there's an event, and if I get one, I'm going to do something based on it. So yeah, I like that, and it feels to me like if I didn't know that at all, that I would probably eventually land there in order to avoid the pain of having to rewrite any couples over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Or if I get rid of a component, if I move it, if I get rid of a dependency or something, how many things need to get rewritten? Is it one like enterprise service bus or something like that? I just move the thing from here to here. Or is it, oh no, I need to change every single thing that ever interacted with that? And now there's a danger on the other side of this. And I think this is when, I think people intuitively, like in their first year, second year, third year of software engineering, well, I think everybody has had this problem at some point where you go, oh, I get it. Abstraction helps. So you abstract the living shit out of everything so that nothing directly communicates with anything else. And the reason that that doesn't work and is so painful is that like now this doesn't match your domain at all. So a slight change in the domain, like what you did is wrote a DSL, and a slight change in the domain radically changes your architecture, which is not necessarily supposed to be the case. Like not every time. Like a radical change in the domain should be a radical change in the architecture. A small change in the domain should be a small change in the architecture. And I think that like when you start abstracting too much, that's like when it starts turning into software engineering for software engineering's sake, not domain modeling.
Right.
So I would call that the boundary on that.
It also feels to me like when I've seen that happen in the past, it's because we were predicting problems and so started
Yes.
abstracting out the solutions for a problem that may or may not ever have happened.
Oh, okay, here's a perfect example with the education thing I was talking about earlier with like a program and unit and section and activity and whatever else. And I realized that like everything below program is just a different kind of post. That was a like aha in the domain. Doing it wrong would be, we still like, that's still really how the domain works. And then just for purely technical reasons, I call them all posts. Because now I'm not using the same terminology for like both of these. And in fact, I still have units and sections and activities, and I have types and stuff for those. And like a lot of this other kind of stuff, the implementation of it is a lot simpler, but it's all being driven by changes to the domain rather than just applying some rando like gang of four pattern.
That reminds me of the big thing in the Agile Manifesto is you have all the stuff on the left-hand side, which is, you have what is like working software over documentation. Yeah. And, there's that little line at the end that everybody forgets, which is while the stuff on the left is important, the stuff on the right is also like good to have. But if you're going to only have like focus on one more than the other, focus on the left.
Well, it's like the value, the idea of having values is huge. And this gets missed from the manifesto a lot too. Like the point of having a value is that it helps you make a decision. So like, hey, both these, like all 8 of the things in the manifesto are all fine. When they come into conflict, we have collectively decided that this one wins. That's what a value is. And like, it's not floofy, it's not bullshit. It's super useful, practical tool. Like, we can avoid a lot of arguments because we've agreed ahead of time that this is what the winner is when this argument happens. And then that can become like, I think the value of having that as a company, as a team, is that like when somebody is considering whether or not they want to join the team, you can have a pretty straightforward conversation with them. It's like, these are the values of this team. These are the values of this company. When these things come into conflict, this is the one that's going to win. And it drives me fucking crazy when companies in particular have values that are like courage. That's not a value. Like, so the value is when you have a chance to be brave or be cowardly, you're going to choose bravery. Oh, that's your value. That's not practical. That doesn't help you solve a problem. But like something that maybe communicates more than somebody means is like, customers are number 1. That is a value. That means employees are number 2. All right. Is that like, I don't even think that's necessarily like a bad value to have, but maybe everybody on the team should know that if it comes down to you or the customer, they're going to pick the customer. I would think a more viable strategy for most, especially like knowledge worker companies, would be the other way around. It's like family first. And even if that means losing customers, we're going to stand by you if like, if push comes to shove. And so like, here's a really good example. So Brooks, when we worked at Galvanize, one of the values was win with integrity. I also worked at Guitar Center, and Guitar Center had a value that was whatever it takes. Those are opposite values. And those were, I think, actually pretty well reflected in that era of both of those companies. Is whatever it takes was like, I don't care if you need to debase yourself, get the fucking sale. Whereas that era of Galvanize was a lot more like, yeah, we want to like win, but we're not going to sell our soul to do it. And those are like, I think, useful values to have. And I think they're useful things to write down and codify and whatever else. So the Agile Manifesto is a great example of that. It's not that you never they set it up a little bit because it's not documentation, it's comprehensive documentation, and they're specifically referencing like the project management binder. I don't think that actually does have any value, but so like it's like very much like it's a little straw manny, but in general the philosophy holds that it's not that processes and tools don't mean anything. It's that the meaning that they provide is subordinate to the individuals and their interactions that they enable. And like a lot of folks, like it's the very first one. It's on the front page of that shitty looking website. And yet companies will go like, oh, well, I mean, we're an Angular shop though. Like every team here has to use Angular. Why? That is a tool, prioritizing a tool. If you have a team that really doesn't want to use Angular, why? Because I think that they think that devs that aren't in on the mission or whatever else, probably is the case. Why do they want to use a different front end framework? Like to be capricious because they just don't, because they wanted to rewrite everything from scratch because they hate collaborating with other teams? Why? What was the reason behind that? And if it's, hey man, this is an internal only tool, we're trying to learn something, we have somebody who can do this way fucking faster in this, like there might be a good fucking reason for that. And like I think it's on the team also to say, well, why do we not want to use the same thing that everybody else is using? Because otherwise, how does something ever get changed? What if it, like the company really does need to move to a different front end framework? Is that supposed to be some master architect who makes that call? Or can it be an evolutionary thing in your company? And like to wit, there's a lot of giganto like FANG enterprises that have exactly this. Netflix still has a shit ton of Ember apps. And so like I think this is a completely reasonable way to approach architecture, and it's right in the first line of the manifesto and the values. And everybody who sees that goes like, oh yeah. I mean, within reason.
All right. Danny actually asked something, or he states, dry is taken too far sometimes, but is a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, dry stands for don't repeat yourself. We engineers do tend to take that very dogmatically. And
Yes.
like, okay, I wrote the word 3. So I'm going to like create a library, release that to NPM, and, you know, start using that everywhere.
Yeah.
Which may not be right. And I think something that I learned in a class on Solid a while ago was don't repeat yourself is actually, and then this may be back to like the domain thing, only is within the same domain. So if we're talking about code that is the same, like it's literally the same lines of code, but they're across 2 different domains, that just means that they happen to be exactly the same right this second, but that's no guarantee that they will be the same in the future.
No, that's mega true. And so like, I'm not a computer science guy. I'm an information systems guy. And we talk about that all the time. Whereas like, do these have the same value right now, or are they the same thing? Because those aren't the same. And like, yeah, I'm also not on the dry train. I like wet, write everything twice. And I think that that is way more aligned with this kind of evolutionary architecture idea in DDD, where you don't know what the useful abstraction is. And there's a lot of danger in like digging in too hard on the wrong abstraction. So, like I have duplicated code in the last month on this project all the time, and I go, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't think this is what it's going to end up being. I don't. It's not obvious how it should be better. But the write everything twice principle is that like by the third time you're rewriting the same thing, you have at least one thing that you can abstract confidently. And you go, all right, if like the domain function that's happening is not immediately clear, well, maybe it's like, um, okay, well, I'll just make it a utility function with a switch statement in it, like, or something like that. Like, you'll just sort of get to that. And the DDD, like supple design kind of idea, is that when you do that long enough, sometimes a new model emerges out of it, or whatever else. Or at a minimum, you're like, oh, yeah, I guess I have this one fucking weird library. Like maybe the problem sticks around for a bit, but like I don't advocate being quick to like abstract the shit out of everything, because especially if you're doing this step by step by step, repeating yourself twice is not a problem. The whole reason that you're not supposed to repeat yourself is that, oh, but then you change it in one place, and what if there's some place that you didn't change it? Well, if that's 2 places, that's not so bad. It's bad when it's 100 places. So there's a point like in between those where you go like, I want to see how this actually gets used, because man, there have been some really elegant interfaces to functions that I've written. And then when I get to the implementation, I go, oh my God, this needs the program too, because it needs this other variable that gets used in this call that I forgot about. So like, don't try to get any of that shit right the first time. And oh my God, it's so much easier to do an abstraction too. When you write everything twice, you do your third implementation of it, and then put them side by side and go, what is common to all of these? All right, well, I can just throw all that in a function right now. What is different about these, if any? If it's none of them, awesome, you've got a useful abstraction. If it's a little bit different, then just fucking kick the can down the road. Do a switch statement, or like a dynamic dispatch, or like something like that, that keeps you from racking up a bunch of debt where you're like, well, now I need to change it in 100 places, but like has gotten you one step closer to where you'll eventually be.
Awesome. Let's see. Viable clan member has a question. This is gonna be more like technical, like design, technical side.
Okay.
Maybe architecture. If you have many pages that each query about 10 rows from a table,
Okay.
which are different for each page, how do you balance a really
Mm-hmm.
clean implementation, but that might cause 10 different separate database hits versus a like wrap it all up in one and get a single hit?
Awesome. So this is actually an area where DDD has a like prescribed solution that I think is actually modern as hell. It feels like a thing that like we're finally doing now that maybe we weren't doing in the past. So the repository pattern is a DDD idea that's like no part of your software should ask for data directly. It should always ask a repository. And a repository in DDD language would be like a Redux store. Like those are super like DDD repository kinds of ideas because you can do things like, oh, I need these 10 rows. It should not be my responsibility to decide whether or not that needs to be a query or whatever else. The repository is in charge of, all right, I need to make a query. Oh, I already have that in cache. Oh, I have it in cache, but it's stale. So I should give that to you now, but I'll also update it in the background. I'll let you know if it changes. Or you only ask for these 10 rows, but it's my job to know that I'm going to ask for the entire fucking table because it's cheaper. They're not big records. But like whatever your consumer of that is, that's not its job to like figure out all of that. That repository idea separates those two things, and it's not as common as I wish it was in current software. Ember, I thought nailed it. Ember was like spot on with like having super intelligent defaults around all of that. The React ecosystem, like I this is like the area that I beat it up the hardest about over the last 5 years. But actually, I think it has badass answers to this now. React Query, I think, is really good, and there's some Redux plugins that handle a lot of these kinds of things, and like exactly the kind of way that like Eric Evans could have only dreamed of when he wrote this shit. But in general, that's the idea: is like how data is retrieved and how data is consumed should have an abstraction between them that is programmatically making those decisions for you.
I also
Oh,
like
and here's the supple design thing, because when it goes from 10 rows to 15 to 20 to 0 to 1 to whatever, you don't have to rewrite your consumer for that every time. You want to put that logic in the thing in the repository, and now you have a supple design where maybe you have two different components or something like that, one of which needs 10 and one of which needs 1, and they can just query the repository in the exact same way. That's supple design.
it also reminds me of like GraphQL changes things a lot also, where as the front end, you can just say, well, this time I want all 10 things together in one
Right.
query and I get them. And next time I want only one thing. And the back end, which has been written in this way that could
Right.
just handle it, just says, okay, whatever, here you go.
Yeah. Punting those like implementation details, that's like super DDD.
Let's see, looking through chat because I'm a little bit behind. Hello, Chantilly. Welcome to the stream. Chad says he hates Redux.
I do too, for the record. I think Redux sucks ass. There are some plugins for it though that I think are great. Like specifically their plugin for serializing state to local storage and then deserializing it automatically. That's pretty damn cool. I and I really, in general, I kind of like flex stores. Redux is a shitty one though. Vuex, way better implementation of the exact same idea. But in React, I just use straight context like 100% of the time because I haven't even been able to come up with a decent hypothetical for something that would be better served by Redux than just the context API. But Redux does still have some like utilities that I kind of wish existed in context.
Yeah, something I really like about Vue that I don't see in React unless they've added it years since I've used it, which is the properties down, events up, where a Vue component basically can emit an event, and it's sort of like the observer pattern type thing, where if you're using that component, you don't have to care about it. It just is, it's a thing. But if you do care about it, you say, okay, let me listen to that event. Maybe like user created is the event or whatever. Form submitted, whatever. And then you're like, okay, well, I know what to do with that. I'm gonna emit my own event because I'm like, if you're going like atomic design pattern type, you're like in a molecule. You want to emit up to the organism.
Dude,
And
I loved that in Vue, and like that came from Ember. That's out of Ember now. That's why I did that Denver script, or no, it was is your last meetup, the front end face off. Like that afternoon, I was like, where the fuck did actions go? And like my brain trust on Ember was like, yeah, we yanked those out. We did the exact same way as React now. So yeah, Vue is the only front end framework that still treats it that way, and it's not a preferred pattern for them either. It's just allowed. It does so for everybody who's familiar with passing down functions as like props in any front end framework. That's like a super functional way to do it. Like it's fine. I feel like it's a little code centric. It's like it's very FP centric, I guess would be a good way to put it. Whereas like the original concept of components was like custom DOM elements. And so just like you can give an element attributes, you can also listen to events on it. And so like that was just the era that I grew up in with SPAs. And like I still think it makes way more sense than passing the function down. And the experience that I've had with component design between the two, I really like designing that style of component more than the function style. And why is if all I have to think about is what does this component need? What gets passed down into it? And what messages does it need to send? I have a really clear black box input output kind of mentality with it. And I need to be real clear about this. There's literally no functional difference. I think even the abstract syntax tree in Vue gets compiled the exact same way. There's not a single thing that you can do differently with either approach. But the mindset of, and which function will I need to perform this transformation is a lot more cognitive load than like, what message do I need to shout? Because then I don't also need to know anything about who's listening to it, what state they're managing. Like I just find that to be a lot more mentally taxing than like, oh, I have this little thing and it yells this and other people give it this. And so Brooks works on a code base that I aggressively designed in this fashion. And so I'm glad to hear that like somebody else likes it, because I've been screaming into a vacuum about this for like 7 years, and nobody else in the FBA ecosystem seems to think that is a valuable way to model components.
it's and I'm no longer working in that side of it because we have fully we are sunsetting that entire thing. So sorry, not sorry. All of that code is going
No,
away.
no, Honestly, dude, it's like one of the reasons that like I wasn't there, and this is nobody's fault. I got nothing but warm feelings for like everyone there, but I worked on that thing for way long after I realized like this will never be viable, will it? And I just kept working on it, and when I left, like I quit out of a broken heart.
Yeah, we have we have like I've implemented a lot of things after you left, and this goes into like we could have like an entirely different stream where we talk about like how to ensure that the products that we're going to work on are actually going to be used.
Yeah.
And like a big part of that is like, okay, we're going to create rules for our team, like what we would call norms. Our norms are always a design sprint. Like this might not be a full Jake Knapp 1 week design sprint. Maybe it's literally a like 2 hour meeting, but we're literally going to pull in the people who are going to use it, and we're going to like do a little bit of design and whiteboarding and everything else to try to like understand why are we doing this? How is it going to be used before we start writing code?
Um, well, like as in general, I latched on really early to that idea. I was like, oh, I'm making a custom element. Elements emit events. Why would my components not do that too? And that was like the very first like thing with React. Where it was like, what the fuck? What do you mean I can't put an event listener on a component?
Well, I
I
remember
don't
when
know.
that feature was first introduced. I wasn't using Vue at the time, but there was a lot of I don't remember if it was you or might have been Siege. Which, by the way, hello Coding Garden, hello CJ.
He's here.
He is here.
Hi, honey.
I remember there was like a lot of well that communication should only go one direction. You shouldn't be able to talk upwards. But then
Okay, but then like that's part of the shit that drove me nuts about the React community is like data down, actions up. I was like, what is going up? Like everything is going down, nothing is going up. Whereas like that, the data down, actions up, I thought made a lot of sense, but like that, like never to this day, I have no idea why the React community came up with that metaphor for what they were doing.
it is interesting. So if somebody wanted to learn more about domain-driven design, obviously they could read the book, but as you mentioned several times, the book is 25 years old.
It's just, yeah, it's
What
rough.
would be the best place to go in the modern era?
That's a good question. Because like I don't know. I don't know how Eric Evans feels about this, but it's probably a bad thing when you write a seminal book and immediately 30 people write more condensed versions of your book. Because there's a lot of like domain driven design distilled or like domain driven design, the essential parts. There's like a lot of those like options out there. Um, Honestly, like read a few blog posts. A lot of these things, unless you want to wonk, and like I'm a wonk, so I wanted to see the dude say it himself in his own words, and I wanted to like trace the history a little bit. But if you just want like to have more familiarity with the concepts, pick any of a million blog posts. Just Google it. Like it's honestly like the things that we've talked about in this thing, there's not a whole lot more that I think is personally is like hyper relevant in 2022. But those things matter very much. And a lot of those got baked into the overall Agile community at large. If you would like to start digging in more on that, Flow System's pretty good. Brooks has been pretty big on that. XP Explained, which is also a very old book, but I think gets to the heart of a lot of these ideas, and I think is aged the best out of like all Agile literature. if you want to, one of my favorite agile things I've read probably in the last 5 years was written by the guy who got me into all this shit. He was local to Denver. His name's Richard Lawrence. He wrote a book called BDD with Cucumber. And it's a pretty misleading title that I feel like he didn't pick. Maybe his editor picked it, because it is not about testing and it's not about Cucumber. But it is like an outstanding book on like domain modeling with a client. And I think it's all done in like very, very real feeling conversations between team members, between the client. None of the situations feel especially contrived. All the problems they talks about feel very real. And so if you want to like know more about bridging the gap between how your customer understands their problem and how your software understands the problem, BDD with Cucumber, even if you don't know anything about testing or have any interest in using like the Cucumber framework, like that's probably where I would go.
Awesome. Okay, question. Is there any examples on YouTube with a DDD conversation?
I don't know. Bad person to answer that.
So to give a little bit of background, Kyle's not a super video person when it comes to like learnings or anything else like that.
Yeah, I'm not modern. I make a lot of videos. I have a YouTube channel with like a bajillion videos on it, but I was just teaching classes and hit record. Like I don't. Yeah, CJ's the guy for that shit.
Well, you only started making those YouTube videos after you got enough demand for it, because you just couldn't imagine it being useful.
Oh no, it was mostly like lack of giving a shit about putting it on the company's YouTube. It was too difficult to do, so that's still how I feel about it. Like, and I don't know, some cat in Russia got some value out of a lesson that I taught. Like, I feel great about it. Like, I'm very happy to share that stuff wildly. But yeah, I don't follow much new media stuff. Like, by the way, that DDD shit. Like, I'm talking about the physical, like, actual book. Which I don't know. As a technologist, I know I'm supposed to do a lot of. I'm the opposite of a lot of people I've noticed who really like reading physical books for like novels and stuff. I hate that. It drives me nuts. I love reading that stuff on my tablet. Any technical like thing that I want to learn, I go get a book, a physical book that I can write in, and the code examples are formatted correctly, and even like over the docs. Now, one exception I'll give to this though is TypeScript. Holy shit, those are the best docs of any kind I've ever seen. Like the official TypeScript docs are so good. And I struggled like using this strategy to find like a really kick-ass TypeScript book. And that one by Boris, I don't remember his last name. It was good. It was a very well-written book and I learned a lot from it. But I was like, cool, give me another one. Give me another 0 to 60 on TypeScript. I want to do like 3 or 4 of them, and between all of them, the mesh of overlap on them, that should get me there. And there kind of wasn't another one that anybody had any strong feelings about. So by chance, I went to the actual docs for the language. And it's like, these are amazing. This is all anybody needs for this. So I don't know. I'm honestly not a Luddite, I promise. But yeah, I do not follow YouTubers. I don't think that I don't think anybody else should do what I do, but I've had a hard time. I don't Twitter. I don't Facebook.
Oh, the only time you even did any social media is it was just shit posting on LinkedIn. So,
which lost me a job.
Yes.
Well, that worked out for both of us just fine.
Let's see. TypeScript physically amps you, viable clan member.
Oh yeah, I love it.
I've been playing with TypeScript too a little bit, and I have to admit it's pretty good.
It's my new favorite thing. I have never enjoyed anything in tech as much as I've enjoyed TypeScript. like the quality of editor hinting that you get alone worth the price of admission. Like you don't even need to use the types. You can do it with like just regular JavaScript files. And like working on this product the last month, the number of the number of hours it saved me, like already have eclipsed like the hours that I spent learning it. It is so easy to learn. Like it's got a lot of cool features and whatever else, but like the core shit that you do minute to minute on TypeScript, like you can learn in an hour. It's like very small stuff. And the number of times it saves you from like, what the fuck? Why isn't this like whatever thing happening? Whereas like, but that thing can be null sometimes. Like the way that it does all of those is a miracle. And I went from like, all right, I guess I'll learn what the kids are using these days. And actually, Danny remembers when like I went on a tirade against TypeScript because I got burned in the CoffeeScript era. Where I was like, nope, I'm just writing the fucking language, because I remember when everybody switched to CoffeeScript and then everyone switched right the fuck back when ES 2015 came out. And I'm not gonna. I learned my lesson. I'm smart, and this is not that at all. This is amazing. It actually brings me joy to use it. And from a domain-driven design standpoint, like I've found that like my types, like that is my domain. And so if I like go back through the git log on like my types file, like that is my understanding of how the domain has changed over time. And like it's just, it's so easy to get started with. And like I write a couple of other statically typed languages, but one of the things that makes TypeScript so special is how much it infers. It infers so fucking much. So like you don't actually have to explicitly type that much. And the shit, I lost my train of thought, but whatever. Big TypeScript guy. I'm still pretty new with it, but I'd mentioned earlier in the stream that like I feel a little bit burned by Playwright. I regret how hard I jumped into that one. I feel the exact opposite with TypeScript. I feel like a fool for not doing this like 3 years ago.
I want to do a pairing session with you on Rust, just to see what you feel about a lot of the things that they put into that, because the language designers of Rust basically, it's a modern language, looked at all these other languages and said, okay, we're going to take what we think are the best and like put that together in a modern low-level language.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a product developer. I'm not like a low-level programmer at all. So shit, that might be kind of fun for both of us, because like I have never written a system call in my life.
Well, and that's the thing is with Rust, it doesn't feel like systems programming. Like there are all the things of JavaScript and TypeScript.
I remember the other thing I really liked about TypeScript was every static type language I've used before is nominally typed, and the structural typing thing, man, am I into that. That feels like really nice. So for anybody unfamiliar, nominal typing is this thing has been named this type, which means it also has like all the characters of that type. So I can safely use it in all these scenarios. Structural typing, which is what TypeScript uses, is duck typing. It's like, does it have this shape? If it has that shape, it is of that type. And it lets you like alias shit in like kind of cool ways. Like there's no like URL type in TypeScript. You can make one though, and like it's alias to a string, and like it allows you to be so much more expressive. And then if you pass a string literal into something, you don't have to cast it to a URL or anything first. But now you just have a more expressive type signature. There's like so, and like I think it lets it infer a lot more. There's just so many fucking cool things from that. Like I'm just over the moon with how happy I've been with TypeScript.
I feel like also the advancements of the editors that we're using really is like
Yeah.
important for this, because maybe like I'm thinking back to like the original clean code book, which talks
Mhm.
about rules like have at most one thing you're passing into a function. You
Right.
only return like this one type of shape type thing. It's that thing becomes less important though when we have a good
Really,
strong
I've
type
noticed that
system,
too.
and like we have an editor that literally says you need 25 things passed in this function, but we're going to walk through everything that you need, and you can't pass in the wrong thing because we're going to hold your hand and help you. We're going to pair with you essentially.
Well, and this is trophy testing. This is like a big part of the appeal of statically typed languages. Is I've seen it too. I feel a need to have like about half as many low level tests as I would in a regular dynamic language, because like so much of it just gets caught by the framework. And like especially if you view your tests as like your real-time minders, your correctors or whatever, if you're really doing like true TDD kind of stuff, um, the types handle so much of the stuff that like you might be used to writing like small tests for, that like you just don't need to write them. And that helps your small test be so much more useful, because now you're only writing a test for something that like could go wrong rather than something that the language could do wrong. Um, and that like so a lot of the like massive refactors that I've done with this like DDD kind of thing have mostly been driven by the TypeScript compiler rather than my tests. And like my tests have also caught plenty of awesome things in the last month. Super glad I have them. Super glad that I don't. Every time that I'm like, really, God, do I really need to fucking make sure that like the tests are like clean on this before I commit and whatever else. And every time I do it, they end up saving my ass like a week later. When it's like, oh fuck, that is a dependency for that. And especially when there are things that are like coming from external APIs that like the TypeScript compiler can't catch. Um, like so, but like my automated tests end up being around those things, and then the compiler is my test for like everything else. I've really enjoyed that workflow.
All right. Well, I think we've run out of questions with chat.
Cool.
And so I think it might be time to start winding things down. Kyle, any
Okay.
last words on domain-driven design?
Sure. Like domain driven design is a book that I got, and I've been getting some value out of it. I'm not trying to advocate it super hard as like a lifestyle or anything. I would advocate that for like lean and agile stuff as a whole. I mean, it's everything from. I'll give you a good example of it. When I do dishes, like a massive mindset shift I've been in is never work in the kitchen if it's not clean. And so even if I'm hungry, clean the kitchen first. You will never regret like having just a clean surface, clean sink, all that stuff to work in, and view the cleanup as part of the activity of preparing the meal. Like as you're working, also be cleaning and like putting stuff in the dishwasher, and like ideally, like when you're done with whatever your meal is, you also then still have a clean kitchen. Like that was not how I was raised or anything like that. That was like a direct application of agile principles, and because I feel like these really are like deep-seated truths that are designed to work with our psychology and how we lie to ourselves naturally, not like in a value judgment kind of way, just how your brain tricks itself. I think a lot of these things are designed to work around those. And these ideas from domain driven design that we've talked about tonight, I think are a big part of that. And they will help you make better software if you stop thinking of it as making software and start thinking of it as solving a problem, and you value having your software look like the problem, like that helps you. It helps you write better software in the long run. And then we also talked about like a little bit of like low level implementation stuff. Mostly it's just decoupling really is valuable. I would also underscore decoupling is not uncoupling. These things have to work together. They have to talk to each other, but you can make them know everything about each other and they have to. And so if one of them changes, the other one breaks. Or you can make it so that I don't know how you look or work or whatever. All I know is that every once in a while I get an ID from you. And so that stuff drives a lot of like wild refactors. And so I guess my last underscore is do not be afraid to try and refactor instead of spending a lot of time designing. And if your architecture isn't matching whatever your domain understanding is, regardless of how big and complicated and whatever your app is, stop. It's always worth the refactoring time to make sure that your software matches how you understand the domain. And that always changes over time, but it starts changing a lot less. The more mature your app is, the more that it gets used. And that's where like the supple design idea kind of comes from. The stuff that never changes, well, I like did some switch statements and whatever in there, and they've never changed because they never had any fucking reason to. And so those end up being pretty rigid. It's fine. The parts that you end up changing a lot get really easy to change. And so that even in and of itself is a decent reason to approach software that way. Thank you all for let me chat at you a little bit.
Yeah, Viable
And
Clan
thanks for your
asks,
thoughtful questions.
does ask like, that's the blue book, right?
Oh yeah, so this is domain-driven design. You can tell from like the cover of it, like when it came out. And so yeah, if you want to walk out, like it's competently written, but you need to kind of look at it more of a historical document because there's so many of these things that like languages don't even let you do anymore that he's like advising people about. And I'm sure there's like distillations and stuff that are out there. Like I said, read a couple of blog posts. But if you do want to like understand some historical context and whatever else, I found this was way more helpful to me than Gang of Four for what it's worth. If you had to read one classic programming book that was like about software architecture, that one way more than Gang of Four. I don't think Gang of Four almost has any relevance in 2022.
So something that I'm just sort of stealing from the Syntax podcast. Do you have any shameless plugs that you would like to give?
So shameless plugs. God, I really don't have anything I'm selling right now. Develop Denver's over, and I'm locked up teaching wise for the next 4 months. I guess in general, Sika Education is my organization, and I'm hoping this coming fall I'll be able to kind of like dive back into that. And what I really want to do is like, so I was a music teacher for a long time, and I taught guitar lessons and piano lessons and that sort of thing. And it's always bugged the shit out of me that like that doesn't exist for software engineering. Like, why can't you take software engineering lessons? Because also as a music teacher, it's not all 11-year-olds. Like, it's also like, no, I'm a professional and like I'm trying to work on this particular area. So like in my time as a pro musician, I didn't know anybody who didn't have at least some kind of teacher. They met with maybe once a quarter, once a year, whatever. So like when we call that like mentoring in a lot of contexts, this is slightly different than that. This is like, I give you an assignment and I want to review your results and give you guidance. And so I've been trying to put together a program for like, you can book a lesson with me and I can give you an assignment and I can review your work and we can have a little conversation about it. And I've been doing that with a couple folks, been like piloting this, and it's like looking good. But I'm going to be tied up until about September. So I don't know. Hit me up or ask Brooks or something next fall if you're looking for programming lessons, and I'm your guy.
Well, and then I know, Kyle, you're on my Discord. So if you do want to
Correct.
ask Kyle any questions, he is on my Discord. Can't obviously guarantee he'll answer in a timely fashion, but do have a Discord link there if you want to join. And then I know, Viable, you were just asking what sites, Kyle, you visit mostly every day. This will be the last question.
Sure. Just Discord, honestly. I don't really go anywhere else. I sometimes people send me links. Like, okay, so here's how I'm going to answer that question. Actually, there's a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. I would highly recommend that. Absolutely changed my life. It is about controlling the presence that tech has in your life. And I had rounds. I had a whole bunch of sites that I checked constantly, all the time, every day. I still just have Discord, and that's too much. I want to step that one back a little bit, also. But like, it's not. If you get value out of them, awesome. But check out that book, Digital Minimalism. It is a great tool set for making sure that you're getting value out of the things that you check every day, rather than just autopiloting. Because back when I checked sites regularly, I autopiloted, and I think it to my detriment.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Kyle, for hanging out with me a little bit.
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
Yeah, this was super helpful. Hopefully, for all of you watching and on YouTube watching asynchronously, you're
Hell yeah.
this is helpful for you also. I will be back tomorrow morning for my normal Sunday morning stream, and then we'll continue building Rust stuff. So with that, let's have a great night, and I'll see you all online on the interwebs, wherever it is.
Cheers, gang.